Tribunal. I had just referred again to the report of Gauleiter Rainer to Reichskommissar Berkel in July 1939, which outlines the further history of the party and the leadership squabbles following the retirement of Ranthaler. In referring to the situation in 1935, he mentions some of the contacts with the Reich government, that is the German government, in the following terms. I quote from page 4 of the English text of that report, and I believe from page 4 of the German text. In August, some further arrests took place.
Which document are you on?
That's the Rainer report, which is 812 PS.
812?
Yes. 61 USA. In August, some further arrests took place, the victims of which were, apart from the Gauleiters, or Gau leaders, also Globachnik and Rainer. Schadenfroh then claimed, because of an instruction received from the imprisoned Leopold, to have been made deputy country leader. A group led by engineer Raffelsberger had at this time also established connections with departments of the Alt Reich, Ministry of Propaganda, German Racial Agency, etc., and made an attempt to formulate a political motto in the form of a program for the fighting movement of Austria. And again, the Rainer report sets forth the situation a little later, in 1936. I quote from page 6 of the English text, and I think page 5 of the German text. The principles of the construction of the organization were: the organization is the bearer of the illegal fight and the trustee of the idea to create a secret organization in a simple manner and without compromise, according to the principle of organizing an elite to be available to the illegal Land Party Council upon any emergency. Besides this, all political opportunities should be taken, and all legal people and legal chances should be used without revealing any ties with the illegal organization. Therefore, cooperation between the illegal party organization and the legal political aides was anchored at the top of the party leadership. All connections with the party in Germany were kept secret in accordance with the orders of the Führer. These said that the German state should officially be omitted from the creation of an Austrian NSDAP, and that auxiliary centers for propaganda, press, refugees, welfare, etc., should be established in the foreign countries bordering Austria. Hinterleitner already contacted the lawyer Seiss-Inquart, who had connection with Dr. Wachter, which originated from Seiss-Inquart's support of the July uprising. On the other side, Seiss-Inquart had a good position in the legal field and especially well-established relations with Christian social politicians. Dr. Seiss-Inquart came from the ranks of the Styrian Hamatschutz, home defense, and became a party member when the entire Styrian Hamatschutz was incorporated into the NSDAP. Another personality who had a good position in the legal field was Colonel Glaze Horstenay, who had contacts with both sides. The agreement of 11 July 1936 was strongly influenced by the activities of these two persons. The Reiner report thus discloses the dual tactic of the Austrian Nazis during this period of keeping quiet and awaiting developments. They were maintaining their secret contacts with Reich officials and using front personalities such as Glaze Horstenau and Seiss-Inquart. The Nazis made good use of such figures who were more discreet in their activities and could be referred to as nationalists. They presented, supported, and obtained consideration of demands which could not be negotiated by out-and-out Nazis like Captain Leopold. Seiss-Inquart did not hold any public office until January 1937, when he was made Counselor of State. But Reiner, describing him as a trustworthy member of the party, through the ranks of the Styrian Hamatschutz, points him out as one who strongly influenced the agreement of July 11, 1936. The strategic importance of that agreement will be considered a little later. And Reiner's report, as I said before, was hardly likely to overemphasize the significance of Seiss-Inquart's contribution. That the Nazis, but not the Austrian government, did well to trust Seiss-Inquart is indicated by the next document I propose to offer in evidence, document 22, 19 PS, which I offer in evidence as Exhibit USA 62. This is a letter dated 14 July 1939, addressed to Field Marshal Goering. The document is a typed carbon of the letter. It ends with the Heil Hitler termination, and it is not signed, but we think it was undoubtedly written by the defendant, Seiss-Inquart. It was the carbon copy found among Seiss-Inquart's personal files, and such carbon copies kept by authors of letters usually are not signed. On the first page of the letter, there appears a note in ink, not indicated in the partial English translation, reading Airmail, 15 July, 15:15 hours, Berlin, brought to Goering's office. The main text of the letter consists of a plea for intercession in behalf of one Mühlmann, whose name we shall meet later, and who unfortunately got into Berkel's bad graces. I shall quote the extract part of the document which has been translated into English and which starts, I believe, on page 7 of the German text. At present in Vienna, 14 July 1939, to the General Field Marshal, Sir. If I may add something about myself, it is the following. I know that I am not of an active fighting nature, unless final decisions are at stake. At this time of pronounced activism, activismus in the German, this will certainly be regarded as a fault in my personality. Yet I know that I cling with unconquerable tenacity to the goal in which I believe. That is Greater Germany, Gross Deutschland, and the Führer. And if some people are already tired out from the struggle, and some have been killed in the fight, I am still around somewhere and ready to go into action. This, after all, was also the development until the year 1938. Until July 1934, I conducted myself as a regular member of the party. And if I had quietly, in whatever form, paid my membership dues, the first one, according to a receipt, I paid in December 1931. I probably would have been an undisputed, comparatively old fighter and party member of Austria, but I would not have done any more for the Union. I told myself in July 1934 that we must fight this clerical regime on its own ground in order to give the Führer a chance to use whatever method he desired. I invite the court's particular attention to that sentence. I told myself that this Austria was worth a mass. I have stuck to this attitude with an iron determination because I and my friends had to fight against the whole political church, the Freemasonry, the Jewry, in short, against everything in Austria. The slightest weakness which we might have displayed would undoubtedly have led to our political annihilation. It would have deprived the Führer of the means and tools to carry out his ingenious political solution for Austria, as became evident in the days of March 1938. I have been fully conscious of the fact that I am following a path which is not comprehensible to the masses and also not to my party comrades. I followed it calmly and would without hesitation follow it again because I am satisfied that at one point I could serve the Führer as a tool in his work, even though my former attitude even now gives occasion to very worthy and honorable party comrades to doubt my trustworthiness. I have never paid attention to such things because I am satisfied with the opinion which the Führer and the men close to him have of me. Now, that letter was written to one of the men close to him, to Field Marshal Goering. I think that suffices to demonstrate Seiss-Inquart as one whose loyalty to Hitler, a foreign dictator, and to the aims of the Nazi conspiracy led him to fight for the Anschluss with all the means at his disposal. It is appropriate at this time to offer in evidence a document from the defendant, von Papen, and to see how he thought the doctrines of National Socialism could be used to effect the aim of Anschluss. I offer document 2248 PS as Exhibit USA 63. This document is a letter from von Papen to Hitler, dated July 27, 1935. It consists of a report entitled Review and Outlook 1 year after the death of Chancellor Dollfuss. After reviewing the success that the Austrian government had had in establishing Dollfuss as a martyr and his principles as the patriotic principles of Austria, von Papen stated, and I quote the last paragraph of the letter, beginning on page 1-146 of the German text. National Socialism must and will overpower the new Austrian ideology. If today it is contended in Austria that the NSDAP is only a centralized Reich German party and therefore unable to transfer the spirit of thought of National Socialism to groups of people of a different political makeup, the answer must rightly be that the national revolution in Germany could not have been brought about in a different way. But when the creation of the people's community in the Reich will be completed, National Socialism could, in a much wider sense than this is possible through the present party organization, at least apparently, certainly become the rallying point for all racially German units beyond the borders. Spiritual progress in regard to Austria cannot be achieved today with any centralized tendency. If this recognition would once and for all be stated clearly from within the Reich, then it would easily become possible to effect a breakthrough into the front of the new Austria. A Nuremberg Party Day, designated as the German Day, as in old times, and the proclamation of a National Socialistic People's Front would be a stirring event for all beyond the borders of the Reich. Such a text would win us also the particularistic Austrian circles, whose spokesman, the legitimistic Count Dubsky, wrote in his pamphlet about the Anschluss, "The Third Reich will be with Austria, or it will not be at all. National Socialism must win it, or it will perish if it is unable to solve this task." We have other reports from Papen to Hitler, which I shall offer in evidence presently, showing that he maintained covert contact with the National Socialist groups in Austria. It is certainly interesting that from the very start of his mission, Defendant von Papen was thinking of ways and means of using the principle of National Socialism for national Germans outside the border of Germany. Papen was working for Anschluss, and although he preferred to use the principles of National Socialism rather than rely on the party organization, he was prepared to defend the party organization as a necessary means of establishing those principles in the German Reich. Next, we have some assurances and reassurances to Austria. The German government did more than keep up a pretense of non-interference with Austrian groups. It employed the psychological inducement of providing assurances that it had no designs on Austria's independence. If Austria could but hope for the execution of those assurances, she could find her way clear to the granting of concession and obtain relief from the economic and internal pressures. I offer document 2247 PS in evidence as Exhibit USA 64. It is a letter from von Papen while in Berlin to Hitler, dated May 17, 1935. Von Papen's letter indicated to Hitler that a forthright, credible statement by Germany reassuring Austria would be most useful for German diplomatic purposes and for the improvement of relationships between Austria and German groups in Austria. He had a scheme for pitting Schuschnigg and his social Christian forces against Nuremberg, the Vice Chancellor of Austria, who was backed by Mussolini. Von Papen hoped to persuade Schuschnigg to ally his forces with the NSDAP in order to emerge victorious over Nuremberg. Von Papen indicates that he obtained this idea from Captain Leopold, leader of the illegal National Socialists in Austria. I quote from his letter starting at the second paragraph of this second page. This is von Papen writing to mein Führer, Hitler. I suggest that we take an active part in this game. The fundamental idea should be to pit Schuschnigg and his Christian social forces, who are opposed to a home front dictatorship, against Nuremberg. The possibility of thwarting the measures arranged between Mussolini and Nuremberg should be afforded to him in such way that he would submit the offer to the government of a definitive German-Austrian compromise of interest. According to the convincing opinion of the leader of the NSDAP in Austria, Captain Leopold, the totalitarian principle of the NSDAP in Austria must be replaced in the beginning by a combination of that part of the Christian elements which favors the greater German idea and the NSDAP. If Germany recognizes the national independence of Austria and guarantees full freedom to the Austrian national opposition, then, as a result of such a compromise, the Austrian government would be formed in the beginning by a coalition of these forces. A further consequence of this step would be the possibility of the participation of Germany in the Danube Pact, which would take the sting out of its acuteness due to the settlement of relations between Germany and Austria. Such a measure would have a most beneficial influence on the European situation, and especially on our relationship with England. One may object that Mr. Schuschnigg will hardly be determined to follow such a pattern, that he will rather, in all probability, immediately communicate our offer to our opponents. Of course, one should first of all explore the possibility of setting Schuschnigg against Nuremberg through the use of go-betweens. The possibility exists. If Mr. Schuschnigg finally says no and makes our offer known in Rome, then the situation would not be any worse, but on the contrary, the efforts of the Reich government to make peace with Austria would be revealed without prejudice to other interests. Therefore, even in the case of refusal, this last attempt would be an asset. I consider it completely possible that in view of the far-spread dislike in the Alpine countries of the pro-Italian course, and in view of the sharp tensions between the federal government, that's Bundesregierung, Mr. Schuschnigg will grasp this last straw, always under the supposition that the offer could not be interpreted as a trap by the opponents, but that it bears all the mark of an actually honest compromise with Austria. Assuming success of this step, we would again establish our active intervention in Central European politics, which, as opposed to the French, Czech, and Russian political maneuvers, would be a tremendous success, both morally and practically. Since there are 2 weeks left to accomplish very much work in the way of explorations and conferences, an immediate decision is necessary. The Reich Army Minister, that's Reichswehr Minister, shares the opinion presented above, and the Reich Foreign Minister, Reich Außenminister, wanted to discuss it with you, my Führer, signed Papen. In other words, Papen wanted a strong assurance and a credible assurance of the preservation of Austria's independence. As he put it, Germany had nothing to lose with what it could always call a mere effort at peace, and she might be able to convince Schuschnigg to establish an Austrian coalition government with the NSDAP. If she did this, she would vastly strengthen her position in Europe. And finally, Papen urged haste. Exactly 4 days later, In a Reichstag address, Hitler responded to von Papen's suggestion and asserted, Germany neither intends nor wishes to interfere in the internal affairs of Austria, to annex Austria, or to conclude an Anschluss. The British will present a document covering that speech. I merely want to use the one sentence at this point. It's a sentence quite well known to history. It is appropriate to take notice of this assurance at this point and to note that for a complexity of reasons, Papen suggested and Hitler announced a policy completely at variance with their intentions, which had been and continued to be to interfere in Austria's internal affairs and to conclude an Anschluss. There was then a temporary continuance of a quiet pressure policy. On May 1, 1936, Hitler branded in a public speech, branded as a lie any statement that tomorrow or the day after Germany would fall upon Austria. I invite the court's attention to the version of the speech appearing in the Völkische Beobachter SD, that's South Germany, 2 to 3 May 1936, page 2, and translated in our document 2367 PS. Without offering that, I ask the court to take judicial notice of that statement in that well-known speech. If Hitler meant what he said, it was only in the most literal and misleading sense. That is, that he would not actually fall upon Austria tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. For the conspirators well knew that the successful execution of their purpose required a little while longer. The quiet policy they had been pursuing in Austria. I now offer in evidence our document L-150, Memorandum of Conversation between Ambassador Bullitt and the defendant von Neurath on 18 May 1936. This document, unfortunately, again, appears in your document books in German, but due to an error, it has not been mimeographed in English. German counsel have the German copy. I shall read from it, and at the same time hand to the interpreter reading in German a marked copy of a German translation. The first paragraph, I might read one sentence. I called on von Neurath, Minister of Foreign Affairs, on May 18 and had a long talk on the general European situation. Then skipping a paragraph, I beg your pardon, I'll read straight on. Von Neurath said that it was the policy of the German government to do nothing active in foreign affairs until the Rhineland had been digested. He explained that he meant that until the German fortifications had been constructed on the French and Belgian frontiers, the German government would do everything possible to prevent, rather than encourage, an outbreak by the Nazis in Austria, and would pursue a quiet line with regard to Czechoslovakia. Quoting, "As soon as our fortifications are constructed and the countries of Central Europe realize that France cannot enter German territory at will, all those countries will begin to feel very differently about their foreign policies, and a new constitution will develop, a new constellation will develop," ending the quote, he said. I skip then 2 paragraphs. Von Neurath then stated that no understanding had been reached between Germany and Italy, and admitted that the demonstrations of friendship between Germany and Italy were mere demonstrations without basis in reality. He went on to say that at the present time he could see no way to reconcile the conflicting interests of Germany and Italy in Austria. He said that there were 3 chief reasons why the German government was urging the Austrian Nazis to remain quiet at the present time. The first was that Mussolini had today the greater part of his army mobilized on the Austrian border, ready to strike, and that he would certainly strike if he should have a good excuse. The second reason for urging Austrian Nazis to remain quiet for the present was that the Nazi movement was growing stronger daily in Austria. The youth of Austria was turning more and more towards the Nazis, and the dominance of the Nazi party in Austria was inevitable and only a question of time. The third reason was that until the German fortifications had been constructed on the French border, an involvement of Germany in war with Italy might lead to a French attack on Germany. But if Germany was not yet ready for open war, didn't get to the 5th paragraph. I'm sorry, if the tribunal, please. I'll just say. I shall repeat the paragraph that was missed in the German translation. Von Neurath then stated that no understanding had been reached between Germany and Italy, and admitted that the demonstrations of friendship between Germany and Italy were mere demonstrations without basis in reality. He went on to say that at the present time he could see no way to reconcile the conflicting interests of Germany and Italy in Austria. He said that there were three chief reasons why the German government was urging the Austrian Nazis to remain quiet at the present time. The first was that Mussolini had today the greater part of his army mobilized on the Austrian border, ready to strike, and that he would certainly strike if he should have a good excuse. The second reason for urging Austrian Nazis to remain quiet for the present was that the Nazi movement was growing stronger daily in Austria. The youth of Austria was turning more and more toward the Nazis, and the dominance of the Nazi party in Austria was inevitable and only a question of time. The third reason was that until the German fortifications had been constructed on the French border, an involvement of Germany in war with Italy might lead to a French attack on Germany. But if Germany was not yet ready for open conflict in Austria, its diplomatic position was vastly improved over 1934, a fact which influenced Austria's willingness to make concessions to Germany and to come to terms. I quote again from the Messerschmitt affidavit on page 11 of the English text. That's document 1760 PS. Developments in the fall of 1935 and the spring of 1936 gave Germany an opportunity to take more positive steps in the direction of the Nazification of Austria. Italy, which had given Austria assurance of support of the most definite character against external German aggression, and on one occasion, by mobilizing her forces, had undoubtedly stopped German aggressive action, which had been planned against Austria, embarked on her Abyssinian adventure. This and the reoccupation of the Rhineland in 1936 completely upset the balance in Europe. it is quite obvious that after Italy had launched her Abyssinian adventure, she was no longer in any position to counter German aggressive moves against Austria. This weakening of Austria helped to pave the way for the Pact of July 11, 1936. On July 11, 1936, the governments of Austria and Germany concluded an accord. That will be offered in evidence also by the British delegation. I merely ask at the point that the tribunal take judicial notice of the fact that such an accord was entered into. The formal part of the agreement of July 11, 1936 will also be proved by our British colleagues. For convenient reference, it will be found in a document which the British will offer, TC 22, and the substance of it is also contained at pages 11 and 12 of Mr. Messersmith's affidavit, 1760 PS. Upon the basis of this part alone, the agreement looks like a great triumph for Austria. It contains a confusing provision to the effect that Austria, in its policy, especially with regard to Germany, would regard herself as a German state. But the other two provisions clearly state that Germany recognizes the full sovereignty of Austria and that it regards the inner political order of Austria, including the question of Austrian National Socialism, as an internal concern of Austria upon which it, Germany, will exercise neither direct nor indirect influence. But there was much more substance to the day's events than appears in the text of the accord. I refer to Mr. Messersmith's summary as set forth on page 12 of his affidavit, 1760 PS, as follows. Even more important than the terms of the agreement published in the official communique was the contemporaneous informal understanding, the most important provisions of which were that Austria would, one, appoint a number of individuals enjoying the Chancellor's confidence, but friendly to Germany, to positions in the cabinet. Two, would devise means to give the national opposition a role in the political life of Austria within the framework of the Patriotic Front. And three, would amnesty all Nazis, save those convicted of the most serious offense. This amnesty was duly announced by the Austrian government, and thousands of Nazis were released. And the first penetration of the Deutsche Nationale into the Austrian government was accomplished by the appointment of Dr. Guido Schmidt as Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs and of Dr. Edmund Glaze Hostenau as Minister without Portfolio. I now offer in evidence Document 2994, P.S., which is an affidavit by Kurt von Schuschnigg, former Chancellor of Austria, executed at Nuremberg, Germany, on 19 November 1945. I offer it as Exhibit USA 66. The defendants have received German translations of that affidavit.
The tribunal has considered the objection to the affidavit of Schuschnigg and upholds the objection. If the prosecution desire to call Schuschnigg as a witness, they can apply to do so. Equally, the defense, if they wish to call Schuschnigg as a witness, can apply to do so. In the event of Schuschnigg not being able to be produced, the question of affidavit evidence by Schuschnigg being given will be reconsidered.
May it please the tribunal, in view of the strategy and tactics of the Nazis, concessions as indicated in the portion of the Messerschmitt affidavit that I read, substantial concessions were made by Austria to obtain Germany's diplomatic formal assurance of Austrian independence and non-intervention in Austrian internal affairs. The release of imprisoned Nazis presented potential police problems. And as Mr. Messerschmitt pointed out in a 1934 dispatch to the United States State Department, quoted on pages 12 to 13 of his affidavit, any prospect that the National Socialists might come to power would make it more difficult to obtain effective police and judicial action against the Nazis for fear of reprisals by the future Nazi government against those taking action against Nazis even in the line of duty. The preservation of internal peace in Austria was thus dependent upon Germany's living up to its obligations under the Accord. Next, Germany's continuing program of weakening the Austrian government. In the Pact of 11 July 1936, Germany agreed not to influence directly or indirectly the internal affairs of Austria, including the matter of Austrian National Socialism. On 16 July 1936, just 5 days later, Hitler violated that provision. I quote from document 812 PS, which is Exhibit USA 61, the report of Gauleiter Reiner to Commissioner Burkel, all of which were forwarded to the defendants Seiss-Inquart. At page 6 of the English and I believe also page 6 of the German version. At that time, the Führer wished to see the leaders of the party in Austria in order to tell them his opinion on what Austrian National Socialists should do. Meanwhile, Hinterleitner was arrested, and Dr. Rainer became his successor and leader of the Austrian party. On 16 July 1936, Dr. Rainer and Globachnik visited the Führer at the Obersalzberg, where they received a clear explanation of the situation and the wishes of the Führer. On 17 July 1936, all illegal Gauleiters, met in Anif, near Salzburg, where they received a complete report from Rainer on the statement of the Führer and his political instructions for carrying out the fight. At the same conference, the Gauleiters received organizational instructions from Globachnik and Hitler. Then, skipping a paragraph, I quote further from this report. In the German version, the paragraph which I'm skipping is omitted, so I'm reading the next.
English translation omitted that German paragraph.
Oh, I'm sorry, that omission is in the English version. I'm skipping a paragraph in the German version. Under the proposal of Globachnik, the Führer named Lieutenant General, that is Gruppenführer, Kepler, as chief of the mixed commission which was appointed in accordance with the State Treaty of 11 July 1936 to supervise the correct execution of the agreement. At the same time, Kepler was given full authority by the Führer for the party in Austria. After Kepler was unsuccessful in his efforts to cooperate with Leopold, he worked together with Dr. Rainer, Globachnik, Rheintaler as leader of the peasants, Kaltenbrunner, that's the defendant Kaltenbrunner in this case, as leader of the SS, and Dr. Uri as deputy leader of the Austrian party, as well as with Glaise, Hossenau, and Seiss-Inquart. A new strategy was developed for the Austrian Nazis. Mr. Messerschmitt describes it briefly, and I quote from page 13 of his affidavit, 1760 PS. The sequel of the agreement was the only one which could have been expected in view of all the facts and previous recorded happenings. Active Nazi operations in Austria were resumed under the leadership of a certain Captain Leopold, who it was known definitely was in frequent touch with Hitler. The Nazi program was now to form an organization through which the Nazis could carry on their operations openly and with legal sanction in Austria. There were formed in Austria several organizations which had a legal basis, but which was simply a device by which the Nazis in Austria could organize and later seek inclusion as a unit in the Patriotic Front. The most important of these was Ostmarkischer Verein, the Union of the East Mark. the sponsor of which was the Minister of the Interior, Glaise Horsenau. Through the influence of Glaise Horsenau and the pro-Nazi Neustadter Stürmer, this organization was declared legal by the courts. I made specific mention of the foregoing because it shows the degree to which the situation in Austria had disintegrated as a result of the underground and open Nazi activities directed from Germany. At this point, I offer in evidence document 2246 PS as Exhibit USA 67, a captured German document, which is a report from von Papen to Hitler, dated September 1, 1936. Too fast. This document is most interesting because it indicates von Papen's strategy after July 11, 1936, for destroying Austria's independence. Papen had taken a substantial step forward with the agreement of July 11. It should be noted, incidentally, that after that agreement, he was promoted from minister to ambassador. Now his tactics were developed in the following terms. I quote the last three paragraphs of his letter of September 1, 1936. To the Führer and Reich Chancellor, those three paragraphs are all joined as one paragraph in the English text. The progress of normalizing relations with Germany at the present time is obstructed by the continued persistence of the Ministry of Security, occupied by the old anti-national socialistic officials. Changes in personnel are therefore of utmost importance, but they are definitely not to be expected prior to the conference on the abolishing of the control of finances at Geneva. The Chancellor of the League has informed Minister de Glaise Horsenau of his intention to offer him the portfolio of the Ministry of the Interior. As a guiding principle, that's the German word Marschroute, that is the route of march, I recommend on the tactical side continued, patient, psychological treatment with slowly intensified pressure directed at changing the regime. The proposed conference on economic relations, taking place at the end of October, will be a very useful tool for the realization of some of our projects. In discussion with government officials, as well as with leaders of the illegal party, in parenthesis, Leopold and Schadenfroh, end the parenthesis, who conform completely with the agreements of July 11. I think that should be a comma. I am trying to direct the next developments in such a manner to aim at corporative representation of the movement in the Fatherland Front, but nevertheless refraining from putting National Socialists in important positions for the time being. However, such positions are to be occupied only by personalities having the support and the confidence of the movement. I have a willing collaborator in this respect in Minister Glaze Horstnow, signature Papen. To recapitulate, this report by von Papen to Hitler discloses the following plans. First, obtaining a change in personnel in the Austrian Ministry of Security in due course. B, obtaining cooperative representation of the Nazi movement in the Fatherland Front. Third, not putting avowed National Socialists in important positions yet, but using nationalist personalities. D, using economic pressure and patient psychological treatment with slowly intensified pressure directed at changing the regime. My next subject is Germany's diplomatic preparations for the conquest of Austria. The program of Nazi conspiracy with respect to Austria consisted of weakening that country externally and internally by removing its support from without as well as by penetrating within. This program was of the utmost significance, especially since, as the court will remember, the events of 25 July 1934 inside Austria were overshadowed in the news of the day by the fact that Mussolini had brought his troops to the Brenner Pass and poised there as a strong protector of his northern neighbor, Austria. Accordingly, interference in the affairs of Austria and steady increase in the pressure needed to acquire control over that country required removal of the possibility that Italy or any other country would come to its aid. But the foreign policy program of the conspiracy for the weakening and isolation of Austria was integrated with their foreign policy program in Europe generally. I should like, therefore, at this juncture to digress for a moment from the presentation of evidence bearing on Austria alone and to consider with the tribunal the general foreign policy program of the Nazis. It is not my intention to examine this subject in any detail. Historians and scholars exhausting the archives will have many years of probing all the details and ramifications of European diplomacy during this fateful decade. It is instead my purpose to mention very briefly the highlights of the Nazis' diplomatic preparations for war. In this connection, I should like to offer to the tribunal document number 2385 PS, a second affidavit of George S. Messersmith, executed on 30 August 1945 at Mexico City. This has been made available to the defendants in German as well as in English. This is a different affidavit from document number 1760 PS, which was executed on August 28. This second affidavit, which I offer as Exhibit USA 68, consists of a presentation of the diplomatic portion of the program of the Nazi Party. To a considerable extent, it merely states facts of common knowledge, facts that many people who are generally well informed already know. It also gives us facts which are common knowledge in the circle of diplomats or of students of foreign affairs. It consists of some 11 mimeographed pages, single-spaced. I read first from the third paragraph in the affidavit, beginning with the third paragraph. As early as 1933, while I served in Germany, the German and Nazi contacts which I had in the highest and secondary categories openly acknowledged Germany's ambitions to dominate southeastern Europe from Czechoslovakia down to Turkey. As they freely stated, the objective was territorial expansion in the case of Austria and Czechoslovakia. The professed objective in the earlier stages of the Nazi regime in the remainder of southeastern Europe were political and economic control, and they did not at that time speak so definitely of actual absorption and destruction of sovereignty. Their ambitions, however, were not limited to southeastern Europe. From the very beginnings of 1933, and even before the Nazis came into power, important Nazis, speaking of the Ukraine, freely said that, quote, "it must be our granary," end the quote, and that, quote, "even with southeastern Europe under our control, Germany needs and must have the greater part of the Ukraine in order to be able to feed the people of Greater Germany," end the quote. After I left Germany in the middle of 1934 for my post in Austria, I continued to receive information as to the German designs in southeastern Europe. In a conversation with von Papen, shortly after his appointment as German minister to Austria in 1934, von Papen frankly stated to me that, quote, "Southeastern Europe to Turkey is Germany's hinterland, and I have been designated to carry through the task of bringing it within the fold. Austria is the first on the program," end the quote. As I learned through my diplomatic colleagues, von Papen in Vienna and his colleague von Mackensen in Budapest were openly propagating the idea of the dismemberment and final absorption of Czechoslovakia as early as 1935. Then, skipping a short paragraph, I resume. Immediately after the Nazis came into power, they started a vast rearmament program. This was one of the primary immediate objectives of the Nazi regime. As a matter of fact, the two immediate objectives of the Nazi regime when it came into power had to be and were, according to their own statements frequently made to me, first, to bring about the complete and absolute establishment of their power over Germany and the German people, so that they would become in every respect willing and capable instruments of the regime to carry through its ends. And second, the establishment of a tremendous armed power within Germany in order that the political and economic program in southeastern Europe and in Europe could be carried through by force if necessary, but preferably by a threat of force. It was characteristic that in carrying through this second aim, they emphasized from the very outset the building of an overpowering air force. Goering and Milch often said to me, or in my presence, that the Nazis had decided to concentrate on air power as the weapon of terror most likely to give Germany a dominant position and the weapon which could be developed the most rapidly in the shortest time. Skipping to the end of that paragraph and resuming at the next. At the same time that this rearmament program was in progress, the Nazi regime took all possible measures to prepare the German people for war in the psychological sense. Throughout Germany, for example, one saw everywhere German youth of all ages engaged in military exercises, drilling, field maneuvers, practicing the throwing of hand grenades, etc. In this connection, I wrote in an official communication in November 1933 from Berlin as follows, quote, "Everything that is being done in the country today has for its object to make the people believe that Germany is threatened vitally in every aspect of its life by outside influences and by other countries. Everything is being done to use this feeling to stimulate military training and exercises, and innumerable measures are being taken to develop the German people into a hardy, sturdy race which will be able to meet all comers. The military spirit is constantly growing. It cannot be otherwise. The leaders of Germany today have no desire for peace unless it is a peace which the world makes at the expense of complete compliance with German desires and ambitions. Hitler and his associates really and sincerely want peace for the moment, but only to have a chance to get ready to use force if it is found finally essential. They are preparing their way so carefully that there is not in my mind any question but that the German people will be with them when they want to use force and when they feel that they have the necessary means to carry through their objects. One further sentence following that quote. military preparation and psychological preparation were coupled with diplomatic preparation designed to so disunite and isolate their intended victims as to render them defenseless against German aggression. In 1933, the difficulties facing Germany in the political and diplomatic field loomed large. France was the dominant military power on the continent. She had a system of mutual assistance in the West and in the East. The Locarno Pact of 1928, supplemented by the Franco-Belgian alliance, guaranteed the territorial status quo in the West. Yugoslavia, Czechoslovakia, and Romania were allied in the Little Entente, and each in turn was united with France by mutual assistance pacts. Since 1922, France and Poland had likewise been allied against external aggression. Italy had made plain her special interest in Austrian independence. Nazi Germany launched a vigorous diplomatic campaign to break up the existing alliances and understandings, to create divisions among the members of the Little Entente and the other Eastern European powers. Specifically, Nazi Germany countered these alliances with promises of economic gain for cooperating with Germany. To some of these countries, she offered extravagant promises of territorial and economic rewards. She offered Carinthia in Austria to Yugoslavia. She offered part of Czechoslovakia to Hungary and part to Poland. She offered Yugoslav territory to Hungary at the same time that she was offering land in Hungary to Yugoslavia. Mr. Messerschmitt states in his affidavit, that's 2385 PS, at page 5, Austria and Czechoslovakia were first on the German program of aggression. As early as 1934, Germany began to woo neighbors of these countries with promises of a share in the loot. To Yugoslavia in particular, they offered Carinthia. Concerning the Yugoslav reaction, I reported at the time, quote, "The major factor in the internal situation in the last week has been the increase in tension with respect to the Austrian Nazi refugees in Yugoslavia. There is very little doubt but that Goering, when he made his trip to various capitals in southeastern Europe about 6 months ago, told the Yugoslavs that they would get a part of Carinthia when a National Socialist government came into power in Austria. The Nazi seed sown in Yugoslavia has been sufficient to cause trouble, and there are undoubtedly a good many people there who look with a great deal of benevolence on those Nazi refugees who went to Yugoslavia in the days following July 25, ending the quote. Germany made like promises of territorial gains to Hungary and to Poland in order to gain their cooperation, or at least their acquiescence, in the proposed dismemberment of Czechoslovakia. As I learned from my diplomatic colleagues in Vienna, von Papen and von Mackensen in Vienna and in Budapest in 1935, were spreading the idea of division of Czechoslovakia, in which division Germany was to get Bohemia, Hungary to get Slovakia, and Poland the rest. This did not deceive any of these countries, for they knew that the intention of Nazi Germany was to take all. The Nazi German government did not hesitate to make inconsistent promises when it suited its immediate objectives. I recall the Yugoslav minister in Vienna saying to me in 1934 or 1935 that Germany had made promises to Hungary of Yugoslav territory, while at the same time promising to Yugoslavs portions of Hungarian territory. The Hungarian minister in Vienna later gave me the same information. I should emphasize here in this statement that the men who made these promises were not only the dyed-in-the-wool Nazis, but more conservative Germans who already had begun to willingly lend themselves to the Nazi program. In an official dispatch to the Department of State from Vienna, dated October 10, 1935, I wrote as follows, quote, "Europe will not get away from the myth that Neurath, Papen, and Mackensen are not dangerous people, and that they are diplomats of the old school. They are, in fact, servile instruments of the regime, and just because the outside world looks upon them as harmless, they are able to work more effectively. They are able to sow discord just because they propagate the myth that they are not in sympathy with the regime." I find that last paragraph very important and worthy of emphasis. In other words, Nazi Germany was able to promote these divisions and increase its own aggressive strength by using as its agents in making these promises men who on outward appearances were merely conservative diplomats. It is true that the Nazis openly scoffed at any notion of international obligations, as I shall show in a moment. It is true that the real trump in Germany's hand was its rearmament, and more than that, its willingness to go to war. And yet the attitude of the various countries was not influenced by those considerations alone. With all those countries, and I suppose with all persons, we are not always completely rational. We tend to believe what we want to believe. And if an apparently substantial and conservative person, like the defendant for Neurath, for example, is saying these things, one might be apt to believe them, or at least to act on that hypothesis. And it would be the more impressive if one were also under the impression that the person involved was not a Nazi and would not stoop to go along with the designs of the Nazis. Germany's approach towards Great Britain and France was in terms of limited expansion as the price of peace. They signed a naval limitations treaty with England and discussed a Locarno air pact. In the case of both France and England, they limited their statement of intentions and harped on fears of communism and war. In making these various promises, Germany was untroubled by the notions of sanctity of international obligations. High-ranking Nazis, including Goering, Frick, and Frank, openly stated to Mr. Messerschmitt that Germany would observe her international undertakings only so long as it suited German interests to do so. I quote from the affidavit, document 2385 PS, page 4. Beginning on the 10th line on page 4 of the English version. High-ranking Nazis with whom I had to maintain official contact, particularly men such as Goering, Goebbels, Lai, Frick, Frank, Daré, and others, repeatedly scoffed at my position as to the binding character of treaties and openly stated to me that Germany would observe her international undertakings only so long as it suited German interests to do so. Although these statements were openly made to me, as they were, I'm sure, made to others, these Nazi leaders were not really disclosing any secret, for on many occasions they expressed the same ideas publicly. Ending the quote. France and Italy worked actively in southeastern Europe to counter Germany's moves.
Would that be a convenient time to break off?
Yes, sir.
Until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning?